The day the gunfighter rode into the Lone Tree yard, I was up on the corral rail trying to mend a top pole that had been kicked loose, and I near fell off it backward. I'd seen hard men before. I'd buried too. But I'd never seen a man sit a horse so still he looked like part of the weather. And I'd never in 40 years on that range felt the hair on my arms stand up the way it stood up watching Brand walk his dun mare past the gate and stop in the middle of our yard like he already owned the dust under him. I want to tell it right, because most of what they say about him is wrong, and the part that's true isn't the part that matters. I was Burl Aiken then, hired man at the Lone Tree, and I'm Burl Aiken now, an old fool on a porch with bad knees, and I am the last one living who saw the whole of it. So you'll get it from me or you'll get it crooked. It was the autumn the note came due. Owen Tilden, who built the Lone Tree out of nothing but the Owl Creek spring and a stubbornness that ran in the family like a brand, had been 3 months in the ground up on the rise under the lone cottonwood that gave the place its name. He'd borrowed against the ranch the last bad winter, when half the colts froze and the hay rotted, and he'd borrowed from the worst man he could have, which was Vester Croy. Croy ran cattle up and down the Box Elder Basin, and he wanted one thing on this earth more than money, and that was water. There wasn't a reliable spring within a day's ride that he didn't own except ours. The Sentinel Spring came up cold and steady at the foot of the buttes on Lone Tree ground, and in a dry country, a spring like that is worth more than gold, because gold won't keep your cows alive in August. Croy had offered to buy the Lone Tree twice while Owen was alive, and twice Owen had told him to go to the devil. And now Owen was dead and the note was coming due, and Croy figured the devil could wait. So that was the country and that was the trouble, and into the middle of it rode a man with $2,000 on his head in 3 territories, looking, of all things, for honest work. "You hearing?" Brand said. He didn't say it loud. He didn't have to. The yard had gone quiet the moment he came through the gate, the way a hen yard goes quiet when a hawk's shadow crosses it. "I came down off the rail. That be the lady's say," I told him, "not mine." His eyes moved to the house and then back to me, and I'll tell you the truth, I was scared of him. Not the way you're scared of a snake where you can step back. Scared the way you are of deep water. You can't tell how far down it goes. Nora came out onto the porch then, drying her hands on her apron, and she looked at him the way she looked at a green colt, measuring, not flinching. She was 28 that year, and she had run the whole of the Lone Tree by herself since her father died, and before that for the 2 years he'd been ailing, so really she'd run it longer than anyone gave her credit for. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's flat, level stare, and she wore men's boots because there's no other kind worth wearing on a horse ranch, and she did not waste words. "You're a Brand," she said. The yard got quieter still, if that was possible. I saw 2 of the day hands edge toward the bunkhouse like they meant to be elsewhere when the shooting started. "I am," he said. "There's a price on you." "There is. You kill the men they say you killed." He sat with that a moment. A lesser man would have lied or bragged. He did neither. "Some of them," he said, "not the way they tell it, and I'm done with it. That's why I'm here and not somewhere with more money in it." Nora looked at him a long time. Then she looked at me, and at the corral with its kicked-loose pole, and at the high pasture where 40 head of unbroke horses stood watching us with their ears up, the only fortune the Lone Tree had left, and the only fortune that could pay Croy's note if we got them gentled, and to the spring sale in time. We were 3 hands short. We'd been 3 hands short all summer, because no decent man wanted to hire onto a ranch that everybody in the basin knew was going under by Christmas. "I can pay 40 a month and found," she said, "which is robbery and you know it, and I haven't got more. I've got more horses than I can break before the sale and not enough men who can ride them. Can you ride?" "I can ride," he said. "Can you break a horse without breaking its spirit? Because I don't keep men who do it the cruel way. My father didn't, and I don't." Something crossed his face then, the first thing I'd seen move on it. "I learned horses before I learned anything I'd care to be remembered for," he said. "I can gentle them." "Then put your mare up," Nora said. "Burl will show you the bunk. We start before light." And she turned and went back into the house, and that was that. She'd hired the most dangerous man in 3 territories the way you'd hire a fence mender, and she'd done it because she needed a rider, and she'd long since stopped being afraid of things that could only hurt her body. By that autumn, the only things that scared Nora Tilden were the ones that could take her land. But I'll say this about that first month: the man could ride. I don't mean he could stick a saddle. Any drunk can stick a saddle for a while. I mean he understood a horse the way a few rare men do, from the inside, like he'd once been one and remembered it. He'd stand in the round pen with a wild thing that had never felt a rope, and he wouldn't crowd it or fight it. He'd just be there, patient as a stone, until the horse decided he was the safest thing in the pen, and then the horse would come to him. I'd broken horses my whole life with sweat and a strong arm, and I stood at that rail and watched a killer teach me there was a gentler way, and I felt something go quiet in my chest that had been loud a long time. He didn't talk much. He took the worst chores without being asked. He slept light, and he slept with the door where he could see it, and he never once took off his gun belt where another man could see him do it. But he worked, Lord, how he worked, and the horses came along faster than I dared hope, and for the first time since Owen died I let myself believe we might make the sale with enough head to clear the note. Then the lawyer came. He came in a buggy with a man named Croy riding alongside on a tall sorrel, and Croy stayed mounted, the way a man does who means to look down on you, while the lawyer got out with his papers. I was at the well and I came up to the porch, and a sack came in from the high pasture and stood off to the side of the yard, easy, his thumbs hooked in his belt, watching everything the way a cat watches a room. The lawyer was a soft, dusty little man named Pell, and he read it all out in a soft, dusty little voice, but the meat of it was this. The note Owen Tilden had signed didn't just come due in the spring, the way Nora had reckoned. There was a clause in it, set there by Croy's own hand, that the full sum fell due at once upon the death of the signer unless the obligation was assumed by a lawful heir of legal standing. And Croy's man Pell stood in our yard and explained, soft as butter, that a woman, sole and unmarried, could not be reckoned a head of household to assume the note nor to reaffirm the recorded water claim at the county seat, which itself lapsed in 26 days unless so reaffirmed. "It is a question of standing, Miss Tilden," Pell said, like he was sorry, which he was not. "The law is the law. Mr. Croy is prepared to be generous. He'll forgive the note entire in exchange for the deed. You'd walk away owing nothing. Most would call that a kindness." "Most would call it theft," Nora said. Her voice didn't rise. That was the thing about her, the worse it got, the quieter she got. "My father built this place. I've run it 11 years. And you're telling me I can't hold my own land because I haven't got a husband." "I'm telling you the recorder won't reaffirm the claim to a woman alone," Pell said. 26 days, Miss Tilden. After that the spring claim lapses, and a lapsed claim is open to filing by any party in the county." He didn't look at Croy when he said it. He didn't have to. Croy spoke then, the only time, from up on his sorrel. He was a big, smooth, well-fed man with pale eyes, and he had a way of smiling that never touched anything above his mouth. "No call for hard feelings," he said. "It's just water, Miss Tilden, just business. You'll thank me come the dry years, when you're not breaking your back over a place that was always going to beat you." He looked around the yard then, slow, and his pale eyes stopped on a sa and stayed. "Brand," he said, "heard you taken to fence work." He smiled his mouth-only smile. "Long fall from what you were." "Long way up, you mean," Asa said. He didn't move, but the air in the yard changed, the way it does before weather, and Pell the lawyer got back into his buggy faster than was dignified. Croy held Asa's eye a moment more. Then he tipped his hat to Nora, all courtesy, and said, 26 days, like he was wishing her good morning, and he turned the sorrel and rode out, and the lawyer's buggy went rattling after him, and the yard was ours again. Nora stood on the porch with the papers in her hand, and for one moment, the only one I ever saw, her shoulders went down. Then they came back up. "Burl," she said, "saddle the bay. I'm riding to the county seat." But she rode there and she rode back 2 days, and she came home gray in the face, because the recorder had told her exactly what Pell had said, only with less apology. The claim would not be reaffirmed to a woman alone. The note would fall due in 24 days now. She could pay it, all of it, if she sold every horse on the place at the spring sale. But the sale was in 19 days, and even if every animal brought top dollar, she'd clear the note by the thinnest margin and have nothing left. No seed money, no breeding stock. A ranch swept clean. And none of that mattered anyway, because the claim to the spring would lapse 2 days after the sale, and a ranch in the Owl Creek country without the spring is just a square of dirt that grows nothing but trouble. Croy would file on the water the hour it came open, and then he wouldn't need to take the land at all. He'd just own the only thing on it worth having and let her wither. Unless there was a man's name on the deed. I knew she was turning it over because she stopped sleeping. I'd see her lamp burning at the kitchen window past midnight. And on the 4th night after the lawyer came, I came in from checking the high pasture and I heard her voice low in the kitchen, and I stopped in the dark of the dog trot, not meaning to listen, and then meaning to, because what I heard froze me where I stood. "I have a proposition for you, Mr. Brand," Nora said, "and I'll thank you to hear it all before you answer." Assa's voice quiet. "I'm listening." "I need a husband," she said. "On paper, nothing more. A man's name on the deed so the recorder will hold my claim and the note can be carried in 2 names instead of refused to 1. A signature in a book. You'd have no claim on me and I'd have none on you. The day the note's cleared and the claim secured, you'd be free to ride, and I'd sign whatever's needed to undo it clean, and you'd owe me nothing and I'd owe you the same." There was a long quiet. I could hear the clock. "You're asking me to marry you," Assa said. He said it flat, like he wanted to be sure he'd heard. "I'm asking you to put your name where the law needs a man's name, and I haven't got one," Nora said. "I'm not asking you for anything else, and I won't. I know what I'm asking is strange. I've thought of every other way there is, and there isn't one. You're the only grown man on this place I'd trust to sign that book and not think it gave him the run of me or my land." Another quiet. Then Assa said low, "Why me? You could ask one of the day hands, a safer man." And Nora said a thing I've never forgotten because it told me she saw him plainer than the whole county did. "Because a safer man would think he was rescuing me," she said. "And then he'd want to be thanked for it the rest of his life. You won't. You know what it is to want to start over where nobody owes anybody. That's all this is. A clean trade between 2 people who don't expect to be saved." I heard the chair move. I thought he'd say no. Any sensible man would have. A wanted man putting his real name in a county book where any marshal could find it, that was a noose near enough. I held my breath in the dark. "There's a price on my name," Assa said. "You put it in that book, the wrong man could read it. You'd be married to a corpse or a fugitive inside a year. You thought of that?" "I thought of it," Nora said. "Did you think that a man's name in a marriage book in a country church looks like a man who quit? Looks like a man who settled? It's the best cover you'll ever have, Mr. Brand, and I'm offering it to you for the price of helping me keep my father's water. That's the whole of it." And after a while, in a voice I'd never heard him use, rough and slow, Assa Brand said, "Then I reckon I'll marry you, Miss Tilden." I went out the back and stood in the cold and looked up at the Sentinel Buttes black against the stars for a long time, and I didn't know whether I'd heard the saving of the lone tree or the ruin of it. Turned out it was both, and neither, and a great deal more than I had the sense to imagine. But they were married 11 days later in the little frame church at Calder's Crossing by a circuit preacher who didn't know either of them from Adam, with me and the preacher's wife for witnesses and nobody else, because the fewer who knew it was a paper thing the better it held. Nora wore her good dark dress and Assa wore a clean shirt I'd never seen, and they stood up there stiff as fence posts, and said the words a foot apart and didn't touch except where the law made them. When he put on her finger a thin band that I later learned he'd bought with near the last money he had, which was a thing she didn't ask of him, and he never mentioned, and which I only knew because I was standing close enough to see it was new. They rode home in the wagon not speaking. That night Nora made up the small back room for him, the one that had been her father's office, and they kept separate as strangers boarding under one roof, which is what they were. And the next morning before light, Asab Brand was in the round pen with a green 3-year-old, gentling it down the way he did, and Nora was in the kitchen frying eggs, and you'd never have known from the outside that anything had changed at all. But the recorder at the county seat reaffirmed the claim, because there was a man's name on the deed now, and the law was satisfied even when the law was a fool, and the note was carried in 2 names, and Croy's clean snatch had been knocked sideways. The spring was held. We had a fighting chance to make the sale and clear the note honest, and so we worked. I want to tell about that fall, because it's the part nobody knows and it's the part that mattered. You can't share work with a person, hard work, dawn to dark, day on day, and stay strangers. It can't be done. The body learns a thing before the mind will admit it. I watched it happen the way you watch a season turn. You can't catch the day it changes, but one morning you look up and it's different. It started with the horses, because that's where they were both honest. Nora knew every animal on the place by name and temper, and Asab had the hands to bring them along, and they fell into working the same colt without planning it, her on the rope and him in the pen, 2 people moving like one and not a word between them because none was needed. I'd see her hand him a coiled rope, and their fingers wouldn't touch, and neither would look at the other, and both of them would be a little too careful about it. And I'm an old man now, but I wasn't born yesterday even then, and I knew what careful like that means. It went on with the suppers. At first he'd taken his plate to the bunkhouse or the porch, keeping the bargain, keeping the distance. Then one cold night Nora set a 3rd place at the kitchen table without saying anything and just looked at him, and he sat down. And after that he sat down every night, and the 3 of us would eat in the lamplight and talk over the day's work and the next day's. And it got so I forgot it was strange. The killer at the widow's table, because it wasn't a killer at the table. It was a tired man, eating beans and arguing with a stubborn woman about whether the gray filly was ready for the bit. And it went on, the way these things do, with the small mercies people don't mean to show and can't help. The day Nora came down with a fever that laid her flat for a week, and Asab Brand, the terror of 3 territories, made broth in that kitchen and carried it to her door and set it inside and went away again, every few hours, day and night, and never once crossed the threshold, never once took an inch of what wasn't offered, just kept her fed and kept the ranch running single-handed, and never said a word about it after. The morning she was well enough to come down, she found the stove blacked and the floor swept, and the books balanced in his blocky hand, and she stood looking at it. And she didn't say thank you, because they'd agreed there'd be no thanking. But I saw her face, and I knew the bargain had a crack in it now that wasn't ever going to close back up. For his part, I think the lone tree got into Asab Brand the way the cold gets into your bones, slow, all the way through, before you know you're chilled. A man who spent his life moving on, sleeping with the door in sight, never owning more than he could carry. You put him on good land with honest work and a woman who looks at him level, and a string of horses that come to his hand, and something in him that's been clenched up his whole life starts, against his own will, to let go. I'd catch him sometimes at the end of a day standing at the corral with one boot up on the rail, looking out at the high pasture going gold in the evening light, the horses grazing, the smoke standing up straight from the chimney, and there'd be a look on his face like a man at a window of a house he can't go into, like he was already saying goodbye to it, because he believed the bargain. He believed that when the note was cleared he'd ride, because that was the deal, and Asab Brand was a man who kept his deals even when they cut him, maybe most when they cut him. Neither one of them would say it. They were two of the proudest, most guarded people God ever made, and each of them had decided the other was just keeping the bargain, and each of them was wrong. And I watched two people who had stumbled into the realest thing either would ever have decided to be miserable about it on purpose rather than risk being the first to break the deal. I near to went mad watching it. But the days were running down, and Croy was not a man to sit and watch his clean snatch turn into a fair fight. The first thing was the fences. We found them cut on a Tuesday, a long stretch on the north line, and 40 head of half-broke horses scattered into the broken country toward the buttes, where a horse can break a leg in a wash, and a man can break his neck finding it. We rode hard for 3 days getting them back, all of us, and we got back all but 2, and one of those we found at the bottom of a draw with its leg gone, and Asab put it down himself, quiet, so Nora wouldn't have to, and stood a moment with his hand on its neck before he led us away. Cut fences in that country don't cut themselves. We all knew whose riders had been seen on the ridge, but knowing and proving are two different counties. The second thing was the sale. The spring sale was the whole game. Every horse we could gentle, brought to Calder's Crossing on sale day, sold to buyers from across the territory, and the money carried straight to the bank to clear Croy's note before it fell due 3 days after. We'd worked ourselves to rags to have the stock ready. And 4 days before the sale, word came down the line, quiet, the way Croy did things, that any man who bought a Lone Tree horse would find Croy a hard neighbor to have, his water closed to their stock on the long drives, his freight wagons slow with their goods, his thumb on every scale they'd ever need. It wasn't a thing you could take to law. It was just the weather changing for anybody who dealt with us. And in a basin where Croy was the weather, that was enough. Buyers who'd promised to come sent word they'd be detained. The sale that was going to save the Lone Tree was going to be Nora Tilden standing in an empty pen with 40 horses nobody dared buy. I have never seen Nora so close to broke as the night that word came. She sat at the kitchen table with the bank's letter in front of her and the lamp burning low, and she didn't move for an hour. And Asab Brand sat across from her, and finally he said the thing that changed everything, though not the way you'd think. "I can fix Croy," he said, soft. "You know I can. One ride to his place. I'd be back by morning and your trouble would be over." And the kitchen went so still, I could hear the lamp. Nora looked up at him. And I want you to understand what was in that room, because it was the whole of both of them. He was offering her the one thing he had, the only thing the world had ever valued him for, the thing he was trying with everything in him to lay down. He was offering to pick it back up and damn himself with it for her, because he couldn't think of anything else of worth that he owned. It was, I have come to believe, the closest that closed-up man could come to saying he loved her. He was offering to throw away the new clean life he wanted more than breath, and go back to being the thing he hated, if it would save her land. And Nora Tilden looked at the man who just offered to murder for her, and what she felt, I saw it cross her face plain, wasn't fear and wasn't gratitude. It was grief, pure grief, that this was the only gift he thought he had to give. "No," she said. "Nora." "No." And then, low and fierce, the realest thing I ever heard her say, "I didn't marry a gun, Asa. I won't be saved by one. If the only way to keep this place is to make you back into the thing you came here to stop being, then it isn't worth keeping. I mean that. I'd rather lose the Lone Tree with you a free man than keep it and watch you ride out to do murder and come back a corpse, with a price on you, with my hands on it." Her voice broke on the last of it, the only time, and she pressed it flat. "You hear me? Not that way, never that way. We'll find another way or there isn't one." And Asab Brand sat there and looked at this woman who would rather lose everything than let him be less than the man he was trying to become. And I watched the bargain die for good, and the truth take its place. Because nobody in his whole hard life, had ever valued the man in him over the gun in his hand. And he didn't say anything because he couldn't, but he reached across that table slow, and put his rough hand over her hand where it lay flat on the bank's letter, and she turned her hand over and held on, and the two of them sat there a long time in the lamplight, not strangers, not a bargain, holding on. And I got up quiet and went out to the porch, because some things a man shouldn't watch, even an old fool who's earned the right to know how the story comes out. It was Nora who found the way in the end, and it was Asa who made it hold, and not with his gun, and that's the part I most want told true. The thing about the recorder's office and Croy's clause and the lapsing claim, Nora had ridden it once and come home beaten, but she'd come home with a copy of the original survey and the original filing, and on the long fevered nights when she couldn't sleep, she'd read them down to the threads. And she found a thing. The water claim Croy meant to file on the hours lapsed. He could only file it if his own holdings adjoined the open ground. And his holdings adjoined ours through a strip of bottom land along the box elder he'd taken years back on a tax sale. Nora read that tax sale 100 times, and on the 100th time she saw it. The notice of that old tax sale had never been posted the full term the law required. Croy had hurried it, the way a powerful man hurries things, sure no one would ever check. The sale was bad. The strip wasn't lawfully his. And if it wasn't his land didn't adjoin the open ground, and he couldn't file on the spring at all, lapse or no lapse. But proving a thing like that takes a hearing, and a hearing takes the county, and the county was 3 days off, and the note still fell due whether the spring was safe or not, and we still had 40 horses no one dared buy. Here's where it turned. Asa Brand rode out alone the night before the sale, and Nora let him go, and I about died of fear, because I thought he'd gone to do murder after all, that he'd decided to take the weight of it onto himself and spare her the choosing. He was gone all night, but he didn't ride to Croy's. He rode the long way, clear around the basin and over the divide to the railhead town of Drummond 2 valleys east, where Croy's weather didn't reach, and he found the horse buyers who'd been scared off, and he sat down across from them, the famous Asa Brand, and he didn't threaten a soul. He told them the truth. He told them Croy's claim to the bottom land was bad, and the hearing would prove it, and Croy's grip on the basin was going to break, and any man who bought Lone Tree horses at a fair price now would be buying ahead of the thaw, when Croy's water and Croy's scales and Croy's thumb would be open to everybody. He didn't sell them on fear. He sold them on the morning coming. And a man's word is worth more when everybody knows he's never once needed to lie, because he's never once been afraid of anything. And the most dangerous man in 3 territories sat in that room and traded entirely on his honesty, the one coin he'd never spent before, and they believed him. They came to the sale, not all of them, but enough, and they bought, careful at first and then in earnest when they saw the quality of the stock, because whatever else was true, the Lone Tree raised horses you'd be proud to own, and Asa and Nora had brought them along right. By the end of sale day the pen was empty and the strongbox was full, and we carried it to the bank, and Croy's note was cleared in 2 names, every dollar with a little, not much, but a little left over. Croy stood across the street and watched us do it, and his pale eyes never blinked, and his mouth-only smile was gone. And the hearing came, and Nora Tilden stood up in front of the county with her father's surveys in her hand, and her voice flat and level and unafraid, and she laid out the bad tax sale plain as plowed ground, and the county had no choice but to see it, and Croy's strip along the box elder reverted, and his land no longer adjoined the open ground, and his clean snatch of the Sentinel Spring fell apart in his hands in front of the whole basin. He'd built his whole grab on the law, and the law, used honest by a woman who'd read it closer than his own lawyer, turned in his hand like a snake. He didn't take it well. There's a last thing, and then I'm near done. 3 nights after the hearing, Croy came to the Lone Tree with 4 of his riders, and he came in the dark, which tells you he knew what he was about wasn't lawful. I was in the bunkhouse, and I heard the horses, and I came out with my old Spencer, and the day hands came out behind me, and we were 4 against 5 and none of us gunmen, and I thought, here it is, here's where it all comes to blood after everything. Croy sat his sorrel in the middle of our yard the way he'd sat it the first day, looking down, his 4 riders fanned out behind him with their hands near their guns. Brand, he called out toward the house. "Come on out. You and me'll settle it the old way and the rest can watch. That's the only thing your kind ever understood." And Asab Brand came out onto the porch, and he wasn't wearing his gun. "I'll see it till I die." He came down the steps slow into the yard with his hands empty at his sides, into the middle of 5 mounted men who'd come to kill him, and he stopped, and he looked up at Croy, and he said, in that quiet voice that carried like a struck bell across the still yard, "I'm not going to fight you, Croy." Croy stared at him. "You're not wearing iron." "No," Asas said. "I'm done with it. You can shoot me where I stand. 5 guns on an unarmed man in his own yard in front of his hands and his wife. You go on and do that, Vester, and there isn't a hole deep enough in this territory to hide you, and you know it. The whole basin watched you lose at law 3 days back. You shoot me down now and you're not a cattle king anymore. You're a murderer, and these 4 men behind you are murderers, and they're looking at the rope right along with you, and they know it." He let that sit. None of the 4 riders had moved. "Or you can turn around and ride home and be a sore loser, which is a thing a man can live with. Your choice. But I'm not going to draw on you because I'm not what you came here to find. There's no gunfighter at the Lone Tree anymore. There's just a rancher you owe an apology, and you can keep that too." And I watched the most dangerous man I ever knew win the only fight that ever mattered to him by refusing to fight it at all. Because Asab Brand had figured out the one thing Croy never had, that the gun had never been his power. The willingness had been. And a man who's truly willing to die unarmed in his own yard is more frightening than any man with a gun, because there's nothing left to threaten him with. Croy sat there a long, long minute. Then one of his riders, a young one, walked his horse backward out of the line slow and turned it for the gate and didn't look back. And then another. And Vester Croy looked around his yard, our yard, and saw that he was alone, that the willingness had drained out of his men like water out of a cracked jug, and that there was nothing here for him but the worst end of his own life. And he turned the sorrel and rode out, and we never saw him on Lone Tree ground again, and within 2 years he'd sold out of the basin and gone, beaten not by a faster gun, but by a man who'd laid his down. That was the night Nora came out onto the porch after the dust had settled, after the hands had gone back to the bunkhouse shaking, and found Asas standing alone in the middle of the yard in the starlight, his empty hands at his sides, shaking just a little himself now that it was done. And she walked down the steps to him. And she didn't say thank you because they'd agreed there'd be no thanking, and there never was, not once, not in all the years. She just walked up to him and put her hands on either side of his hard face and looked at him level the way she'd looked at him the very first day, measuring, not flinching, and she said, "The note's cleared, the claim's safe, the bargain's done." She held his face. "You're free to ride, Asab Brand. I'll sign whatever and does it clean. You don't owe me a thing." Her voice was steady, but I was close enough to hear the bottom drop out of it. "Or you can stay, not on paper, for real, because I'd have you. I'd have you for the rest of my life, and I'd never ask you to be one thing more than what you are right now, standing in my yard with no gun on, which is the best man I ever knew." And then the only soft thing I ever heard Nora Tilden say, "Don't ride, Asa. There's room. There was always room. I just hadn't the nerve to say it till you'd given me leave to lose you." And Asab Brand, who had spent his whole life with the door in sight, ready to run, reached up and took her hands down from his face and held them and said, "Rough, I'd been dreading the day that note cleared since the day I married you. Thought it meant I had to go." He held on. "I don't want to be free of you, Nora. I want to be home, if you'll keep me." And she kept him 41 years. They never undid the paper. They just made it true, the slow, honest way they did everything. And there came a real wedding the next spring in the same little church, with the whole basin there this time. Because by then the whole basin had cause to be grateful and the sense to know it. And the deed stayed in 2 names, and stayed that way long after the law would have let her have it back to 1, because by then neither of them could have told you where one of them left off and the other began. I worked for them till my knees gave out, and then I lived with them, family by then if not by blood, An old bachelor with no people of his own grafted onto theirs, which is its own kind of mercy, and I won't pretend I deserved it. I watched them raise the Lone Tree up into the finest horse outfit in the Owl Creek country. I watched a Sabran become a man the basin trusted with its disputes, because everybody knew he'd faced down 5 guns unarmed and won, and a man like that you don't argue with, you ask his counsel. I watched the two of them grow gray under the lone cottonwood on the rise, and I watched them sit out on that porch in the evenings shoulder to shoulder not needing to talk, the way they'd worked those first colts, 2 people moving like one. He hung his gun belt on a peg by the back door the night Croy rode off, and as far as I ever knew he never took it down again. It hung there 40 years, the famous gun of a Sabran, going to dust and rust on a peg in a ranch kitchen, while the man who'd carried it forked hay and gentled horses and sat at supper and grew old beside a woman who'd valued him for everything but that. I used to look at it hanging there and think it was the best thing I'd ever seen, that quiet rusting gun, because of all it meant. A man can be more than the worst thing he ever did. The world won't tell you so, but it's true, and I watched it be true for 40 years on the Lone Tree, and you can believe me, because I'm the last one left who saw it, and I am too old to lie. She offered him a marriage only on paper to keep her land. That was the bargain, and the bargain was a fair one, and it would have been enough. But what grew up between them through that hard, honest fall, the broth at the door, the rope passed hand to hand, the empty gun, the 2 names on the deed, the room there'd always been, that was never in the bargain at all. It was the thing that came after, the way the green comes up after a hard winter you were sure would kill the place. Unlooked for, unpromised, and worth more than all the water in the basin. They're up under the cottonwood now, the both of them, side by side where they belong, and I'll be up there soon enough off to the side where the hired man goes, and I don't mind it. It was a good outfit to work for. It was a good place to grow old. And it was a fine thing, a rare and fine thing, to have a front row seat the year the most dangerous man in 3 territories rode into a failing ranch looking for honest work, and found, instead of a fight, a home, and was wise enough, at the last, when the door stood open and he was free to run, to stay.